I still remember the way the dining room light shimmered against the silverware that night. Almost too bright, too polished, like everything in that house had to pretend it was perfect. My mother had arranged this dinner for my brother's big promotion, an occasion she'd spoken about for weeks, as if it were a royal coronation. Everyone came dressed like they were meeting the president. I wore my usual plain shirt, the one I'd ironed twice that morning, trying to look put together. But the moment I walked in, I could feel it. The same familiar tension, like I'd brought bad luck with me. Mom's smile tightened the second she saw me. "Oh, you made it," she said, in that half-surprised tone that always cut deeper than any insult. My brother clapped my back like a charity gesture, flashing the new watch he couldn't stop mentioning. "Man, I didn't think you'd find the time between those odd jobs," he joked. The table erupted in polite laughter. I smiled, pretending it didn't sting. Dinner started with champagne toasts and conversations I wasn't meant to join. They spoke about success, money, who just bought a house, whose kid got into what school. Every word was a subtle reminder of how far beneath them I supposedly sat. My sister leaned over with that fake pity voice and asked if I was still trying to figure things out. I nodded, chewing slowly, pretending not to notice the smirk she shared with Mom. I had so much I could have said. About the bills I'd quietly paid, the nights I stayed up moving funds around so they could keep that very house they were bragging about in. But saying it out loud felt pointless. They didn't want truth. They wanted hierarchy. And I was their designated disappointment, the one that made them feel more accomplished. Mom kept bragging about my brother's work ethic, her eyes flicking to me like I should be taking notes. When the food arrived, she leaned back and sighed. "See, honey, this is what happens when you push yourself. Some people just never find the motivation." The word "some" hung in the air like smoke. Everyone knew who she meant. I focused on my plate, my fork trembling slightly as I forced a small smile. "Yeah," I said softly. "Some people don't." Every bite felt heavier, every laugh sharper. I wanted to leave, to walk out and breathe air that didn't smell like judgment. But something inside me told me to stay, to endure it, quietly, completely. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was a test. I watched them talk, these people who owed me more than they knew, and I realized how blind pride can make someone. They worshiped titles, cars, salaries. They had no idea who was actually holding their world together. By the time dessert came, the table was loud with laughter and champagne bubbles. My mother looked radiant, pleased with the illusion of her perfect family. She caught my eye and said, "You'll get there one day, dear. Just don't give up hope." Her tone carried that syrupy mix of mockery and false encouragement. I nodded again, calm, detached. "Maybe," I said quietly. "One day." They all chuckled like I'd told a harmless joke, and I let them. I let them have their moment, their illusion of superiority. Inside, something shifted. A quiet resolve. A line drawn without words. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner wasn't just another night of humiliation. It was the beginning of the end of their comfort, because soon, the very person they mocked would be the reason their world started to shake. As the laughter faded and Mom raised another toast to my brother, I stared at the candle between us. The flame flickered, steady yet alive, reflecting in my glass like a secret I hadn't told yet. I smiled faintly, and for the first time that night, it was genuine. They thought they were winning, but the truth was waiting, patient and unstoppable, just like that flame. It's strange how people forget the hands that kept them steady. They talk about success like it's born in isolation, as if they climbed alone, untouched by the quiet sacrifices buried beneath their path. After that dinner, I couldn't stop thinking about all the years I'd spent making sure they never saw the edge of ruin. They called me a failure because I didn't wear my effort like a medal, but the truth was, I'd carried them farther than they'd ever admit. I still remember the first time I paid one of their bills. Dad had been sick, the kind of illness that scared the whole family but no one wanted to discuss. The hospital invoices kept stacking up on the kitchen counter like reminders of our helplessness. I was just out of college, working late shifts at a job that barely covered rent. But I took a deep breath and told the hospital to send the bill to me. I didn't tell Mom. She was already snapping at everyone, too proud to ask for help. So I just did it, quietly, without recognition. That became my pattern. When the mortgage fell behind 2 years later, I dipped into my savings, money I'd been tucking away for a small apartment of my own. I remember handing the check to Dad and saying it was from a friend who owed me. He smiled in relief. Mom never questioned it. She just sighed and said, "We're lucky some people still care about us." I wanted to tell her that the person who cared was sitting right there at her kitchen table, drinking coffee from a chipped mug she'd once said looked cheap. But I didn't. Gratitude forced upon people like her never lasts. It only bruises their pride. My siblings weren't any different. When my sister got into college, she called me crying about tuition. I worked double shifts for months, sleeping in my car some nights to save gas money. I sent her the check and told her it was from an anonymous scholarship fund. She thanked God, not me. I remember smiling at that, how easily people pray for miracles when the miracle has your name on it. My brother was worse. He was always chasing status, obsessed with being admired. When he lost his job and called me desperate for help, I wired him enough to cover 3 months of rent. He never said thank you. Instead, a year later, he bragged about how real men figure things out without begging. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. Let him keep his story, I thought. I didn't need to rewrite it for him. I never asked for repayment. I never wanted applause. I just didn't want them to fall apart, even when I was breaking inside. I told myself that family meant carrying the weight no one else would. But that quiet sense of duty slowly turned into something darker, resentment cloaked in patience. I started noticing how they looked at me, not with gratitude, but with pity. To them, I was invisible unless they needed something, a walking safety net. An afterthought still, I kept going. Every transfer, every bill, every quiet act of rescue was a secret piece of me given away. I told myself they'd never understand, that maybe I didn't want them to. But sitting there after that dinner, the word failure echoing in my head, I finally saw the truth. They hadn't just forgotten what I'd done. They'd rewritten me out of their story entirely. And the worst part? I had let them. I'd trained them to see me as less because I'd hidden every sacrifice behind silence. But silence only protects pride. It doesn't build respect. That night, for the first time in years, I wondered what would happen if I stopped being invisible. What would they do if the quiet provider simply stopped? The sound of my brother's laughter filled the dining room, bouncing off the polished walls like it owned the place. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of wine, and bragged about his new luxury car. "It's not just a car," he said proudly. "It's a statement." Everyone clapped, even Mom, whose eyes gleamed as though she'd birthed royalty. She reached across the table and patted his hand, saying, "You've always had ambition, unlike some people who are content with small jobs." Her glance flicked toward me, brief, sharp, deliberate. The table laughed. I didn't. It wasn't the first time she'd said something like that, but it still hit like a cold slap. I tried to smile, to keep the peace, to stay the quiet shadow in the family picture. The meat on my plate turned to sawdust in my mouth. My brother kept talking about horsepower and leather interiors, while my mother nodded proudly, calling him her shining example. I sat there, the dull background to their glossy success story, the one who had potential once. My sister chimed in too, saying something about how, at least he's not wasting his time like some people do, and everyone laughed again. The sound was light, almost musical. If cruelty had a melody, I wanted to disappear. But worse, I wanted them to stop seeing me as someone small. They didn't know that every dollar that helped my brother buy that suit, that watch, that car, had once come from my quiet hands. That every time Mom's medical bills were paid, it was me behind the curtain, but that truth was like shouting into the wind. It wouldn't reach them. They'd already decided who I was, a man defined by what he didn't have, not what he gave. As I sat there, pretending to listen, I caught my reflection in the mirror behind them. I looked tired, older than my years, the kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from being unseen for too long. There was a hollow ache in my chest, like grief for something that never existed. A family that saw me, respected me, valued me beyond utility. They'd built their image of me brick by brick, lazy, unlucky, unambitious, and I'd been too quiet to tear it down. Mom poured more wine, her smile practiced and bright. "You know," she said, turning toward me, "maybe if you networked more, you could get somewhere too. You're smart enough. You just don't push yourself." My father, always the peacemaker, cleared his throat softly. But he didn't defend me. He never did. His silence was his way of agreeing without words. I nodded slowly, pretending her jab hadn't landed. "Maybe you're right," I said, forcing a laugh. That seemed to satisfy her. The table returned to its easy rhythm of shallow stories and self-congratulation. Underneath it all, I felt something shift. Not anger exactly, something quieter, colder. The kind of emotion that forms when you've spent years being underestimated. I realized that the pain wasn't from their words, but from what they represented. Indifference. They could mock me because, in their eyes, I didn't matter enough to hurt. I was safe to ridicule, a harmless target. The failure, who couldn't possibly feel pride because he didn't own anything worth envying. The night dragged on, each laugh slicing a little deeper. When dessert came, my brother toasted to success and hard work. He raised his glass high, smirking at me as if daring me to disagree. I lifted mine too, but I didn't drink. I just watched the bubbles rise and vanish, like everything I'd done for them. Visible for a moment, then gone without trace. They say family wounds cut deepest because they're made with familiar hands. That night, surrounded by people who shared my blood but not my heart, I learned that laughter can be the sharpest knife of all. And as I sat there smiling through the pain, I started to wonder, not if I deserved their respect, but whether they ever deserved my silence. The words came out of her mouth so casually, so effortlessly cruel that for a second I thought I'd imagined them. "You're our biggest failure," Mom said, her tone flat and decisive, as if she were stating a simple fact, like the weather or the color of the tablecloth. The air went still. Even my brother stopped talking. My sister's fork froze midair, her eyes darting between us. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than shouting. I felt something collapse inside me. A quiet, dull breaking sound no one else could hear. My pulse pounded in my ears. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rage. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight, dry. She didn't even look sorry. In fact, she sipped her wine afterward, her face calm, as if she'd finally said what she'd been holding in for years. Dad shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearing his throat again like that might erase the moment. "Honey, maybe that was a bit harsh," he murmured. But she waved him off, eyes still on her plate. "I'm just being honest," she said. "Sometimes the truth hurts." He's old enough to hear it. My brother smirked behind his glass. My sister gave a nervous laugh, like she wanted to make it less awful but didn't dare. Something in me, something I'd spent years keeping buried, started to rise. Slow, steady, unstoppable. The anger wasn't loud or wild. It was measured, controlled, simmering beneath the surface like a pot left too long on the stove. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I'd worked myself sick for. The one I'd protected from bills and debt collectors and worry. And there she was, labeling me a failure, as if none of it had ever happened. I almost stood up right then. My chair scraped slightly, the sound sharp in the still air. For a moment I thought about walking out, just leaving, letting them choke on their own arrogance. But I didn't, not this time. Leaving would mean surrender. Silence had always been my way of surviving. But suddenly, it felt like another form of obedience. I couldn't let them define me anymore. So I sat back down, forcing my hands to stay still, my voice calm. "You really think that?" I asked quietly. The table waited for her to double down, and she did. "You're almost 40, and what do you have to show for it?" she said. "No big house, no fancy car. You could have been something if you just tried harder." Every word hit harder than the last, but I didn't flinch. I just nodded slowly, memorizing each syllable, each sneer, like they were ingredients in a recipe I'd need later. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Because deep down, I knew something she didn't. That power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it watches. And sometimes, it lets the people who underestimate you dig their own grave. The conversation stumbled back into awkward laughter after that, but the energy had shifted. They thought I'd taken the blow quietly, like always. They were wrong. That night, something irreversible changed in me. I realized I'd spent years trying to earn love from people who'd already decided I wasn't worth it. But love shouldn't be a performance, and respect shouldn't require applause. I sat through the rest of the dinner with a calm so sharp it almost frightened me. I smiled when they spoke, nodded when expected, but inside, I was already planning my silence's end. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to swallow the insult. I was going to make them see what failure really looked like, and it wasn't me. I smiled. That was all I did. Just a small, quiet smile, the kind that makes people uncomfortable because they can't tell what it means. My mother mistook it for surrender. My brother thought it was embarrassment. But inside, I felt something else entirely. Clarity. Cold, steady, liberating clarity. The room returned to its rhythm, but I wasn't part of it anymore. Their laughter sounded distant, like it was coming from behind a wall. My mother's voice floated in and out, sharp, polished, dripping with pride whenever she spoke about my brother's promotion. I nodded occasionally, just enough to seem polite, but my mind was elsewhere. I was replaying memories, each one sliding into place like pieces of a puzzle I'd been too blind to see before. The first was my father's surgery bill, the one they said they'd find a way to pay. They never did. I had quietly, without thanks. Then my mother's mortgage, those mysterious payments she believed were bank errors in her favor. I'd been making them for years, keeping her safe while she called me lazy. My brother's tuition, my sister's car down payment, even that family trip to Italy they still bragged about. I'd made them all possible. Every debt, every so-called miracle they'd enjoyed had come from the same invisible hand they were mocking tonight. I remembered the nights I'd gone without new clothes or dinners out just to make sure. Mom didn't lose the house. I remembered working late into the night, the hum of the office lights, the endless numbers on my computer screen, while she told her friends I never pushed myself. Each memory felt heavier now, not with regret, but with revelation. I wasn't the failure here. I was the foundation, and they had built their thrones on my silence. Across the table, my brother laughed again, describing how he'd earned his car through hard work and smart decisions. The words almost made me laugh out loud. I thought of the last time he'd called me, in tears, begging for help with his student loan when his credit cards maxed out. I'd paid it off. Not once did he thank me. Now he bragged about his discipline while wearing the watch I'd bought him as a graduation gift. My mother refilled her glass, still talking, still oblivious. "You know," she said to my sister, "when you're successful, people just treat you differently. They respect you." I watched her hand tremble slightly as she poured, and it hit me. She wasn't cruel because she hated me. She was cruel because she feared what she couldn't understand. Humility, quiet success, integrity. None of those fit the world she admired. She needed noise and proof and applause, and I'd never given her that. I took a slow sip of water, letting the glass cool my palm. On the surface, I was calm. Beneath, I was volcanic. The tension wasn't anger anymore. It was anticipation. For once, I wasn't the one reacting. They were. Every jab, every insult rolled off me because I finally saw what they didn't. Their dependence, their ignorance, their fragility. They thought I was beneath them, but without me, their perfect little image would shatter like glass. When Mom laughed again, I joined her. The sound surprised her. "What's funny?" she asked, suspicious now. I shrugged lightly. "Nothing," I said. "Just thinking about how unpredictable life can be." I caught her eye then and held it, steady, unflinching. She looked away first. They didn't know it yet, but dinner wasn't over. It was just the calm before the storm I'd been preparing for years. The moment finally came without warning, like a quiet storm breaking the still air. My mother was midway through another smug story about how success skips a generation, when I set my fork down gently, the sound sharp enough to still every conversation. My brother chuckled, thinking I'd finally had enough and was about to storm off. I didn't. I looked up, calm as ever, and said, "You know, Mom, if I'm such a failure, then who's been paying your bill?" The room froze. The laughter died mid-breath. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. My mother blinked, her glass halfway to her lips. My brother frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice trembled. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her gaze with the same even calm I'd spent years mastering. "I mean the mortgage," I said softly. "The electric bill, the water bill, the hospital stays, the car insurance, the dinners, the little trips you take. Who do you think's been paying for all that?" Her hand lowered slowly. I could see her mind scrambling, flipping through years of false assumptions, trying to find solid ground. "You're joking," she whispered, though her voice betrayed the fear under the denial. My brother laughed nervously. "Come on, man, what are you talking about?" "We all pay our own," I cut him off gently. "Do you?" I asked. "Because last time I checked, that loan forgiveness letter you got from your bank wasn't a mistake." "I paid it. The down payment for your first car? Me? The Italy trip? You thanked God for that miracle? I guess that makes me your God." The air thickened with disbelief. My sister's eyes widened, darting between us as if she were watching a stranger at the table. "You're lying," my mother finally spat, her pride rising to shield her panic. "We've managed just fine without your help." I nodded slowly. "Then check your bank records. You'll find monthly transfers from an account labeled Sable Consultancy. That's me. The same small job you love to mock. It pays more than all of you combined." My brother leaned forward, his bravado gone. "Wait, Sable Consultancy? That's your firm?" He looked like he'd been slapped. "You told me you just worked there." I smiled faintly. "I founded it. 5 years ago." Silence. Pure hollow silence. Even the ticking clock on the wall seemed to pause. I watched the realization spread. First confusion, then shame, then something else. My mother's lips parted, but no sound came out. The woman who'd spent years calling me a disappointment now couldn't meet my eyes. "Why?" she finally whispered, almost breaking. "Why would you do all that and never say anything?" "Because family should help family," I said. "Because I believed love didn't need to be loud or transactional. I thought if I kept giving, maybe one day you'd see me. Not for what I own, but for who I am." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The truth had weight enough. My sister wiped her eyes. My brother stared at his plate, the arrogance stripped away. My mother tried to recover, forcing out a brittle laugh. "You could have told us," she said weakly. "We didn't know," I shrugged. "You didn't ask. You never wanted to know who kept you comfortable, as long as you could keep calling me a failure." I stood, sliding my chair back slowly. "I'm done being invisible. From now on, you'll pay your own bills. You'll live the success you brag about." My mother reached for me, her hand trembling. "Don't do this," she pleaded. "You're family." I looked at her, the same woman who had just mocked me, now small and uncertain. "Exactly," I said. "And maybe it's time you remember what that actually means." I turned toward the door, leaving them in the heavy silence I once mistook for peace. Behind me, no one moved. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. The storm had passed, but its echo would haunt that dining room long after I was gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a thin folder I'd brought with me, just in case I ever needed to stop being their ghost. I slid it across the table. My brother frowned. My mother hesitated before opening it. Inside were neat printed records, bank transfers, mortgage confirmations, hospital payment slips, and a stack of emails with their names on every line. She scanned the pages, her hand beginning to tremble. "What is this?" she whispered. I leaned forward slightly. "Proof," I said. "Proof that your so-called failure has been keeping this family afloat while you laughed." My brother snatched a few pages, eyes darting back and forth, his face draining of color. "This can't be real," he muttered. These numbers, this is thousands. Try hundreds of thousands," I replied calmly. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the chandelier. Every laugh that had filled the air minutes ago now felt like a distant echo. My mother dropped the papers, her shoulders sinking under the weight of what they represented. I watched the denial fade from her eyes, replaced by something raw and unfamiliar. Shame. You paid for everything? She asked, her voice breaking. I nodded. Every time you called me useless, I was probably paying one of your bills. My sister's eyes filled with tears as she looked through the folder. You even covered Dad's surgery? I nodded again. The hospital said it was anonymous, remember? I wanted to keep it that way. I didn't want gratitude. I just wanted peace. My mother pressed a hand to her mouth. For the first time, she looked small, fragile even. My brother, who had spent the night flaunting his car and his promotion, sat frozen, staring at a transfer receipt showing his student loans cleared in full. He whispered, "You saved me." I smiled faintly. "No, I enabled you. There's a difference." He flinched as if the words themselves burned. The truth wasn't cruel. It was cleansing. I could feel the room shifting. The balance that had always leaned in their favor was suddenly gone. Every insult, every jab, every smirk, they all seemed to hang in the air like ghosts, fading into silence. My mother tried to gather herself, reaching for her dignity. "You should have told us," she murmured weakly. "We didn't know how much you'd done." I met her eyes. "You didn't want to know. It was easier to believe I was beneath you than admit how much you needed me." The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. My sister pushed the papers back toward me as if they burned her fingers. "I had no idea," she said softly. "None of us did." I could see the cracks forming in each of them, their pride unraveling thread by thread. Finally, my mother looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Why tonight?" she asked. "Why now?" I stood slowly, resting a hand on the table. "Because you called me a failure," I said. And I realized, I've spent years buying your respect, but you never intended to give it. So tonight, I decided to stop paying for the illusion. No one spoke. My mother looked down, unable to meet my gaze. My brother's hands shook as he folded one of the receipts, as if holding proof of his own guilt. The dining room that once felt suffocating now seemed hollow, stripped of all its noise and judgment. I took the folder back, slipped it into my jacket, and looked at them one last time. "You can keep your pride," I said quietly. "I'll keep my peace." Then I turned toward the door. Behind me, the silence said more than any apology ever could. I stood slowly, letting the chair's quiet scrape fill the space where laughter used to be. No one dared speak. My mother's eyes followed me as I straightened my jacket, her expression a fragile mix of confusion and dawning fear. I took a slow breath before I said, "You see, respect doesn't need to be loud. I've never needed applause to know my worth. But it seems silence made you forget who's been holding this family together." My voice stayed steady, even gentle, but it carried weight. My brother shifted uncomfortably, his hand still clutching one of the receipts. "So what, you're just done?" he asked, half incredulous, half pleading. I turned to him. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm done. You wanted to see me fail? Watch what happens when I stop holding you up." The words landed like a thunderclap, soft but final. My mother's face crumpled, her pride unraveling faster than her composure could rebuild it. "You can't just walk away," she whispered. "We're family." I met her gaze calmly. Family is supposed to lift each other, not weigh one person down while pretending to cheer. Her mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing left to say. I looked around the table. The untouched food, the expensive wine, the empty laughter that had once filled this room. "All of this," I said, gesturing to the house, the table, the illusion of success, "exists because I refuse to let you collapse." I did it quietly, because I thought love meant sacrifice. Turns out it just made me invisible. I paused, letting the truth settle, then added, "But I see you now, and I see me. That changes everything." My brother leaned forward, desperate. "Come on, man. You can't mean that. You're angry, that's all." I smiled faintly. "No, anger fades. Clarity stays." His lips parted, but no sound came. The same man who'd mocked my small job couldn't find words now that he realized how much smaller his own success was without me behind it. My sister broke the silence next. "So what happens now?" she asked softly. I turned to her. "Now," I said, "you all learn what it feels like to stand on your own. You'll figure it out. You always said you didn't need me. I could feel the shift in the air, the fragile structure of their superiority collapsing, one unspoken truth at a time. My mother tried one last defense. "You're punishing us," she said bitterly. "You think this makes you better?" I shook my head. "No, Mom. It makes me free." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the quiet one at the table. I felt like the one who'd finally spoken the language they'd refused to hear. Truth. I glanced around one last time and smiled, not with bitterness, but peace. "I don't need an apology," I said. "Just remember this night the next time you call someone a failure." I started toward the door. My brother rose halfway, as if to stop me, but didn't move further. My mother whispered something under her breath. Maybe my name, maybe regret, but I didn't turn back. Some storms aren't meant to be waited out. They're meant to clear the air. As I reached the hallway, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Behind me, the silence remained thick and trembling, the sound of pride cracking under truth. For once, I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away in control. The next few days unfolded like the slow echo of a storm that refused to fade. At first, they didn't understand what had changed. My mother probably assumed I was bluffing, that I'd cool off and quietly resume fixing everything like I always had. But when the first unpaid notice arrived, her mortgage payment, it must have felt like a tiny crack in the world she'd built around herself. By the end of the week, the cracks became fissures. My phone buzzed constantly. Calls from my mother, my brother, my sister. I didn't answer. I watched the screen light up, then go dark again. Part of me still felt that old instinct, to pick up, to fix, to soothe. But I didn't. I had given them years of rescue. Now, they needed to meet reality on their own terms. 2 weeks in, the panic began to show. My brother's text shifted from defensive to desperate. "Hey man, can we talk?" Turned into, "Please, I need to figure out the car payments." He'd financed a luxury lifestyle on the assumption that someone, me, was always behind him with a safety net. Now his credit cards declined. His shiny new car sat in the driveway, more burden than badge. My sister sent a long message one night, apologies tangled with excuses. She said Mom was not herself lately, that things were harder than expected. I didn't reply, though I read every word. I imagined the dining table where it all began, cold, silent, no laughter now. Maybe they still sat there some evenings, hoping I'd walk in and make everything right again. The mortgage company called my mother about missed payments. The utilities followed. I knew because she forwarded the notices to me, as if habit could replace humility. The first time she called, I let it ring. The second, I blocked the number. It hurt more than I expected. For all their cruelty, they were still my family. But pain doesn't excuse entitlement. Love doesn't survive one-sided. I started sleeping better. It surprised me how light the air felt without obligation pressing on my chest. My apartment, once small and quiet, felt peaceful now, mine in every sense. I cooked for myself, took walks, even smiled without reason. Freedom, I realized, wasn't loud either. It was quiet, like my smile that night at dinner. Meanwhile, word must have spread. My mother's friends stopped visiting when they realized her perfect life had cracks. Pride has a way of isolating people when the facade breaks. My brother tried posting pictures online to prove everything was fine, but even through the filters, you could see the strain. The comments went from praise to polite silence. Success built on shadows doesn't hold up under sunlight. By the 3rd week, Mom left a voicemail. Her voice was soft, fragile. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You were right. We took you for granted. I didn't realize how much we needed you until now." She paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry." I sat there listening, staring at the ceiling. The apology I'd once dreamed of didn't feel triumphant. It just felt late. Still, I didn't call back. Not yet. They needed time to feel what I'd felt for years. Overlooked, unappreciated, alone. Sometimes the only way people learn gratitude is through absence. I began focusing on my company more. Without the emotional drain, I found new energy, new clarity. I closed 2 major deals that month. My firm grew faster than ever. For the first time, every dollar I earned stayed mine. The family dinner that started it all had become a memory now. a lesson carved into my bones. They wanted me to fail, but all they'd done was teach me how to stand taller. As their lights dimmed, mine grew brighter, not out of revenge, but balance. I had finally stopped holding them up, and in doing so, I discovered something I hadn't felt in years, peace that didn't require anyone's permission. The silence that once felt lonely began to feel like space, wide, open, and full of possibility. With the weight of obligation gone, my days stretched differently. Mornings weren't rushed by anxiety anymore. They started with clarity. I'd wake up early, open the blinds, and let sunlight pour in without feeling like I owed anyone its warmth. For years, I'd funneled my energy into keeping others afloat, covering bills, solving crises, cleaning up emotional messes. Now, that same energy flowed into something of my own, a business I'd dreamed about but never had the bandwidth to build. The idea had been sitting in my journal for years, scribbled between receipts and reminders, an independent consulting firm helping small companies modernize their systems. At first, it was just me, a laptop, and a quiet drive to prove something. Not to them, but to myself. I spent nights drafting proposals, refining my pitch, reaching out to potential clients. Slowly, contracts started trickling in. 1 turned into 5, 5 into 15. Within 3 months, I had enough work to hire 2 part-time employees. The satisfaction wasn't in the money. It was in knowing I was finally building without invisible strings attached. Outside of work, I found myself reconnecting with people I'd neglected. Old college friends, a neighbor who always waved from across the hall, even the barista who remembered my coffee order. These weren't transactional relationships. They were real. Conversations didn't revolve around who needed what. They flowed with laughter, mutual respect, and ease. I realized how long I'd confused being needed with being loved. Evenings became sacred. Sometimes I'd cook dinner, play soft music, and enjoy the quiet hum of my own life. Other nights I'd meet friends for walks or dinners where nobody measured worth by paychecks or promotions. For the first time, I felt emotionally wealthy. Meanwhile, news of my family's struggles reached me through the grapevine. My brother sold his car. My mother downsized. My sister took on a second job. It wasn't revenge, it was reality. The same reality I'd shouldered quietly for years. They were learning survival, the way I had learned patience. I didn't gloat. I didn't interfere. I simply lived. One afternoon, while organizing my office, I came across an old photo. My family at a picnic years ago. Everyone smiling, unaware of the fractures to come. I stared at it for a while. There was love there once, buried under ego and pride. Maybe someday we'd find it again, but it wouldn't be built on guilt or expectation. It would have to start from honesty. By the 5th month, my business officially turned a profit. My accountant congratulated me. I barely smiled. Not because I wasn't happy, but because I'd learned happiness wasn't loud anymore. It was steady, like a quiet heartbeat that didn't need applause. The irony was that my success finally looked like what my family had always celebrated. Money, growth, status. But now it came without their validation. I'd become everything they said I wasn't, simply by walking away. I started documenting my journey online, not for clout, but to help others stuck in similar cycles. Messages poured in from people who resonated with the story. Those who'd been called failures by the very people they supported. It felt good to know that my pain had purpose beyond myself. One evening, as I stood on my apartment balcony watching the sunset, my phone buzzed. It was my mother's number. I didn't answer, but this time I didn't feel anger, just calm acceptance. Maybe someday I would pick up, maybe not. For now, I had built something stronger than family approval. Self-respect, independence, and a life that finally felt like mine. I leaned on the railing, feeling the breeze against my face. For the first time, I wasn't holding anyone up. I was standing on my own, and the view had never looked better. It was a gray afternoon when I heard the knock on my door. Soft, hesitant, like a sound unsure of its welcome. I almost didn't answer. But something in that pause, that small ache of curiosity, made me turn the handle. There she was, my mother. Smaller somehow, her usual sharp poise replaced by something fragile. Her eyes were red, her shoulders drawn in as if the years had finally caught up to her. She held a paper bag with trembling hands. "I brought lunch," she said, her voice cracking in the middle of the sentence. I stepped aside silently, letting her in. The smell of her old recipes drifted out, a scent that carried 1,000 memories. We sat at the table, the same table where I'd once been called a failure. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. For a long while, neither of us spoke. She picked at the corner of a napkin, eyes darting toward me, then away. Finally, she said, "I didn't realize what I was doing to you. To all of us." Her voice wavered. "I thought success looked a certain way, that it was about who made the most noise, who shined the brightest." I stayed quiet, watching her words unravel into the air. She looked older, not just in age, but in spirit. "When the bills came," she continued, "I saw your name on every one of them. I didn't know what to feel. Shame, mostly. You gave so much, and I never said thank you. I was too proud to admit I needed you." Her tears came slowly, the kind that didn't beg for pity. They were real. For a moment, I saw not the woman who mocked me, but the one who once tucked me in at night, who used to hum softly when she cooked. Time had built walls between us, but regret had a way of slipping through the cracks. "I wanted to come sooner," she said, "but I didn't know how to face you." I took a breath. "You don't have to say everything today," I told her. "Just being here, it's enough for now." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. She nodded, eyes glistening. "I was wrong," she whispered. "You were never a failure. I just didn't understand what strength really looked like." The room felt heavy with everything we hadn't said for years. I wanted to tell her how much it had hurt, how her words had buried themselves in my bones. But I also saw that she was already carrying that weight now. There was no satisfaction in watching her break. Only a quiet sadness that it had taken this long. When she stood to leave, she hesitated by the door. "Can I come by again?" she asked softly. "Maybe," I said. "Let's take it slow." She nodded, offering a small, trembling smile before walking away. When the door closed, I sat back down at the table, staring at the untouched food. I realized forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a process. A gradual untying of knots that had been pulled too tight for too long. I wasn't sure where we'd go from here, but for the first time I didn't feel anger anymore. Just a cautious hope, fragile but real, that maybe healing, like respect, didn't need to be loud. It just needed to start.